Hey guys, what's going on? Nananki here, bringing you another round of Kerbal Space Program. Today's mission, if we choose to accept it, is to visit Eve and return, ideally in one piece with our Kerbal intact, our pilot, who I think we will determine right now. I remember in earlier versions of the game you couldn't pick your crew, you were just kind of stuck with whoever it assigned you. Jebediah is currently on the space station I'm working on building that is currently orbiting the moon. So he's currently busy. So this time around I think it'll have to be either Bill or Bob. I guess Bill's up there in something as well. Let's go with Bob, who's actually already in there by default. So that works out nicely. This also gives me an example to show you my ship. My needlessly large, unnecessarily complicated, gigantic, supermassive lifting stage. And how it looks getting into orbit. Looks like this will be a nighttime launch. I love when the physics kick in and everything kind of settles and bounces a bit. No problems. Just turn on the RCS and make sure nothing is randomly firing. I ran into a bug on my last ship that I had in orbit when I went back to it from the Space Center. As a matter of fact, before we even launch, that's a very good point, we should probably make sure these planets are aligned, because we could burn a mountain of fuel to go straight to Eve. Well, not exactly straight, but get there quickly, or we could wait until they are aligned in such a way that we require the minimum amount of delta V, or change in velocity, to reach it. Like right now it's there. I think it should be like over here somewhere if we want to go straight to it and meet it on the far side. So let's just time accelerate that until it's a thing that's happening. And from this tracking station, you can time accelerate massively as opposed to tiny increments. I like all the unknown objects, the asteroids that apparently come in and occasionally hit Kerbin. It's actually pretty interesting. I'm halfway tempted to... Oh, well, we can't see it anymore. It's gone! It's a shame you can't track them properly. If I zoom out, will I be able to see it again? No, it's just gone. There's one coming in slightly beyond the orbit of Minmus. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, I guess you can deflect these things by flying a mission out to them, but I haven't messed with that yet, frankly. If we go back to time acceleration mode, basically what do these do? Come in and hit Kerbin, I take it? Whoa. It's going so fast. I wonder if we could see this thing coming in from the ship we have randomly orbiting. Another copy of Eve or Bust. The last test I did. I guess this one's gonna miss, it looks like. Get flung off in a new direction, probably come back actually and hit, because it looks like it skimmed the atmosphere. Or it'll just fly out into space indefinitely. No, it's slowing down. I don't know. This is not our goal, though. Our goal today is to go to Eve. It looks like these things are generated more or less constantly by the game, so I'm not going to worry about them too much right now. Right now, I'm going to worry about going to Eve. You know, Kerbin will survive a few asteroid impacts, not a big deal. But yeah, you can see I have a couple things currently active. A moon station, I have a probe that I sent to Jewel. This thing, man, we should just retire it because all it's doing is orbiting pointlessly. Poor Bill. Stuck in orbit for a year. Like, guys, this was just supposed to be a test. Can't go any faster than 100,000 times time acceleration. That is usually enough for just about anything, though, so not too big of a deal on that front. If you draw a straight line between Kerbin and the Sun, and draw like a 45-degree kind of wedge shape out, that's, I think, roughly where it needs to be, based on my amateurish guesstimations from my minimal experience playing this game. I don't know, at this point I have a lot of experience going to the moons of Kerbin. I could do that practically in my sleep at this point, but going to other planets is something I've only done twice. Literally, I made that mission to Duna, that's on my channel, and I took a probe to Jewel, and that's pretty much it. Alright, that's getting close to a wedge shape. It's not quite 45 degrees, we'll go a little bit farther. Maybe like that, kinda. Yeah, that's pretty close. Let's give that a shot. Standing by to launch. Good. Let's fly that thing. Bob's still standing by on the runway. That's cool. Wait till everything stops swaying. Quite so much. I don't like the swaying. You can see like the prograde indicator appearing and disappearing, like, I don't like that at all. Nothing broke, did it? Well, even if it did, it's kind of hard to tell because there's so many chunks of metal connecting those two bits. But I had to have a way to dock back onto this thing, and sticking a docking port onto the side just seemed like a bad idea for trying to get back, because if it's in a straight line, then there's not so much chance of it breaking, but if it's off to the side, if it's laterally mounted, it's going to have a lot of torque trying to bend it off when I apply any kind of thrust. I didn't want to deal with that. Alright, let's do this thing. Throttle up. SAS on. And ignition. Groovy. And away we go. There are a lot of thrusters on this thing initially. As a matter of fact, the two solid rocket boosters that are attached to the largest section have to be jettisoned before they are even burned up, because this will run out of fuel before this does. And they're just there to get that massive amount of fuel moving up. You know, it takes this long just to get up to about 100 meters per second. Then at this point I pretty much throttle it down so I don't waste too much energy fighting the atmosphere. You know, you still want to be accelerating, but you can go down to just above 50% throttle pretty much and be good. As well as angling over just a tiny bit. You want to be just about on 90 degrees, which is east. Because the planet rotates counterclockwise, you get a little bit of a boost by angling off to the right. As opposed to trying to counter the rotation of the planet and going left, you end up burning a whole bunch more fuel just to get into a solid orbit. I am by no means an authority on the most efficient way to launch in Kerbal. It's all kind of trial and error for me. I've learned that going any more than about 230, 250 meters per second at 10,000 meters, any more than that on the way up, like if your rate of progression is higher than that, then you end up spending fuel fighting the atmosphere needlessly. It's better to just throttle it down a bit, or build a ship that doesn't even need to be throttled down and has the exact right amount of thrust. But any more thrust than that, and you're just burning fuel needlessly. Yeah, right when this gets to 0, we will stage this section. Get those off of there. The next thing that'll burn out is this solid fuel booster off to the side. It doesn't have much left to it either. In fact, the ones I fired up in the air collide, and we fly through the debris, which is always fun. As long as they're clear of the ship, that's all that matters to me. And then all the rest of these solid fuel boosters, which have their thrust limited slightly for the sake of efficiency, will run out in another dozen seconds. And once you get over about, 10,000 meters, you should probably roll over to about 45 degrees. Again, this is probably not the most efficient way to do it, but it's the way I've kind of learned to do it. Goodbye, solid fuel boosters. You were helpful. It's kind of funny, actually, when you look at the amount of fuel remaining, it tells you how much is remaining out of the total supply accessible to the rocket. So even though the inner rockets aren't using any fuel out of their own tanks yet, they're being fed from the outer tanks, it'll still show the total available, which will be, this tank plus the two side tanks, which are 50% larger roughly than this. So it'll show it being down to about a quarter of its fuel, even though at the time these are actually out, even though it'll actually have the entirety of itself remaining. And when you decouple everything, it'll recalculate that and show them to be full again. So it's always a good idea to pay attention to your actual resources as opposed to what this bar says, especially if you've got a lander or something where exterior rockets are being fed from a central tank, because it won't be entirely accurate. It's also kind of handy to right-click them to see exactly what they got left, as opposed to trying to judge the speed at which the little bar is decreasing, as opposed to trying to look at how many pixels are left. It's like, here's a number. It's a little bit more straightforward. That way you waste as little time as possible. getting those off of there. And at this point, you can go to the map view, because once the apoapsis gets up around 100,000, going any higher is pretty much just wasting fuel. Getting awfully close to the point at which we need to burn. I would like to have this thing perfectly straight at 90 degrees, but it doesn't really have to be. As long as it's pretty close. That's quite good enough. The important thing really is just that you're burning before you get on top of the apoapsis, because burning after it is less efficient. Yeah, it'll be close enough. Periapsis should be popping up on the other side any moment now. And once they go to flip, that's pretty much the point at which I will cut throttle. Yeah, 90 and 100 something. Close enough, not too bad. Could be better, could be worse. It's still safely out of the atmosphere. The atmosphere ends somewhere around, I don't know, 75, 80. Might be a little bit below 70 even. 70,000 meters, that is. 70 kilometers. Now that we've got that step of the process done, it's time to take a look at going to... Hey, look, another unknown object. Man, I do want to check those out at some point, but since they seem to be there in mass clusters at all times, I'm not super worried about it right now. I'll worry about it maybe for the next thing I do will be asteroid diversion. Right now I want to set Eve as the target, and when laying in a course for a planet that is on a lower orbit, you want to fling off counter to your orbital direction. You know, we're going around the sun counterclockwise, so if we fling off of Kerbin in this direction to the left, we will effectively be lowering our orbital velocity around the sun and moving into an inner orbit. I'm going to drag that until it goes out of Kerbin's sphere of influence, which is right there. I'll zoom it out some, and yeah, it's pretty close to off on a good angle there. Oop. It's sensitive, this thing. Somewhere around there. That's pretty close. We might change it more depending on things. Yeah. By increasing the amount of delta V we put into it, the closer we get to crossing the orbit of Eve. Yep, see, we'll meet it over here, it looks like. So how to get those closer? Let's see. Now that we have an encounter, well, not exactly an encounter, but a closest approach. Let's see, that looks like Eve is going to be behind, so we honestly should probably just time accelerate, but you know, this thing's got a ton of fuel in it, and I don't think we even need to. I think if we just change the angle at which we are flinging off, you know, that's not too bad. 1.3 million meters. Let's see what we can do with that. Let's see if we go that way. That's pretty close. What if we lower things? See, to my senses, that right there looks really close. Oh, goodness, I had the mouse wheel over the maneuver node when I started trying to zoom out, which means I affected some element of it, because you can mouse over the things and roll the wheel to change them. What we need to do is lower our orbit a bit. I'm going to try altering the time of our departure from Kerbin. And then lower further. Oop, there we go. That's an encounter. Periapsis of 65,000 kilometers. Surely we can get that down to a more reasonable number. Oop, now it's going back up again. Looks like 58 something is about as close as that's going to get at this angle. So what if we... Oh, that's going to be making it higher as well. Yeah, that's pretty darn close, really. Yeah, it looks like everything else I do just makes it farther. I'd like to get that closer, though. Yeah, we're going to be passing up above it. See, we will encounter it in 111 days and leave in 113. That does give us 3 days to adjust it, but adjustments we make far out will be much more effective than adjustments we make once we get there. But I bet we could do some adjusting like halfway there. At some point they added the ability to add multiple maneuver nodes. I find that to be highly, highly useful. Because by doing the second one there, we end up with a periapsis that's much more reasonable at not a significantly greater expenditure of delta V. Let's see how low we can get this thing. Oh, that's about it. 10,003. Or I'm sorry, 10 million. You know, that's still only 10,000 kilometers. In deep space terms, at least, that's not very far. I still would not mind getting that down a little bit farther. Oh yeah, wow, that'd be in the atmosphere if I'm not mistaken. I'm guessing, since I've read the atmosphere is basically twice as thick and the gravity basically twice as heavy, I'm assuming that you'll have to be a little bit higher than... Well, that looks awfully close to me, though. You know, if we just let that encounter happen, we'll be flung off in kind of a wild arc, but we'll be getting in orbit around Eve, so I think that's pretty good. I think we're going to go with that. That's really not very much fuel to get up to that speed, relative to our current speed, so we're going to do those two maneuvers. Also, since we're safely in space now, it's time to deploy. Even though we're in the dark at the moment and it won't matter, it is time to deploy. That is a battery. Not the batteries, but things that will fuel the batteries are solar panels. You know, we do have Bob on board to do any kind of important piloting, so we won't lose control of the vessel utterly without power, but it'd still be nice to have power. Don't have a lot of solar panels, but don't need a lot of solar panels, so it works out nicely. Alright, might as well just time accelerate to the first burn. Though the time it estimates for the burn is based on our current engines, not the atomic engines, which will not be nearly as powerful as these massive monsters. Granted, there are a lot more of them, but they are way, way less powerful. They're also much, much more fuel efficient, which is the name of the game in interstellar travel. Interplanetary, at least. So even though it only says a minute, I think when we get down to about 2.5 minutes, we're probably going to start this thing up. Honestly, though, we might get that much delta V out of just what's left in these outer tanks. Maybe we shouldn't start that early. Maybe start at a minute 30, minute 40, that'd be good. It's all guesswork, really. I don't want to start too early, because it'll throw off things as badly as starting too late. But now seems like a good a time as any. Yeah, we definitely won't get all that just out of the exterior tanks, but we'll get a good chunk of it. Really, we could fire up the atomic motors at this point. It wouldn't do any harm. But we'll just do this in the staging. I've got it already arrayed to do. That's lovely, isn't it? Yeah, we can't run the nuclear engines at full thrust, or they do overheat. They also have thrust vectoring, which is very handy. Yeah, suddenly our estimated burn time is like 4 minutes. Even though they say they're overheating, it doesn't change their thrust or their specific impulse or efficiency. So it doesn't do any harm to leave them at, 80-90% overheated, so long as they don't go all the way to the threshold of exploding. Because the guidance computer will move that according to changes in our velocity and so on and so forth. Hoping it'll do all the complicated math for me, so I can just aim at the thing. As long as we don't use more than half of our fuel, we should not have any problems getting back to Kerbin. Not to mention we won't have so much lander attached to the thing for the way back. It'll be less weight to push, and less weight in fuel since we'll have burned up half of it, or hopefully slightly less than half of it on the way there. So everything kind of works in my favor as far as that's concerned. But yeah, the degree to which they overheat remains pretty stable. Even if you get them up to close to the end of the bar, it doesn't go any farther. There's no like runaway reaction where once they get over a certain point they are more susceptible to overheating. It's directly correlated to how much throttle they have. Whoa. Camera flips. A little confusing. Got plenty of power in this thing. Not only that, the atomic rocket motors have a alternator in them that generates electric charge. Because I do have a remote guidance unit on the main drive section, so it'll still be operable even when we're not on it, even when Bob is no longer connected to it. I find it highly satisfying building very complicated vessels in Kerbal. Alright, coming up to the end of this burn. Get ready for engine cutoff. Countdown doesn't quite match up with actual seconds, but it's close enough. 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, we're gonna kill that there and catch up to the thing. Ooh, more camera rotations. That's exciting. At this point we're dealing with a small amount of remaining burn, but 4 meters a second over the course of millions and millions of kilometers of travel, you know, winds up being a degree of variance that turns into a huge difference at your destination. You know, if it's like if a plane gets 1 degree off course at the end of a 2,000-mile trip, you know, that 1 degree ends up being a huge variance. I'm not doing that math. I'm just not. If you thought I was going to give you a number, no, I'm just going to give you the general idea. Well, that entire episode was just getting the course laid in and plotted and executed to head to Eve. So next episode, actually going to Eve, and everything that follows from there. We'll see how many episodes it all ends up being. I don't know if I should cut more or not. You guys want to hear me ramble during burns? I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I do greatly appreciate it. As always, do like it if you liked it, and I will catch you next time. Peace.